This is the Vacation Rental Success Podcast, keeping you up to date with news, views, information and resources on this rapidly changing short-term rental business. I'm your host, Heather Bayer, and with 25 years of experience in this industry, I'm making sure you know what's hot, what's not, what's new, and what will help make your business a success. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Vacation Rental Success Podcast. This is your host, Heather Bayer, and as ever, I am super delighted to be back with you once again and so glad that you have joined me here today. So, if you've been listening for a while, you know we talk a lot about the business of short-term rentals, from operations to marketing to team building to occasionally, very occasionally, revenue management. But at the very heart of it, there's something simple and powerful, and that's good communication. And more often than not, that starts with good writing. What you may not know about me is that I come from a family of journalists. In fact, my great-grandfather began a career in journalism, working all over the north of England and Wales. He was actually a founder member of the National Union of Journalists. For a time, he was editor of the now-defunct Preston Herald in Lancashire. And then he founded his own press agency for the north of England, and that eventually provided employment for 4 of his children and a grandson. And they were all journalists. And my mother was a very talented writer. So I've got a little bit of a few of these genes. And, I have to say that English was always my best subject at school. Definitely wouldn't test me on math or science or anything outside of the arts. I loved to write. I am amazingly good at Scrabble, and I beat the computer more often than not when I'm playing as a master in Scrabble. So there you are. That's me. I like to write. I like my words. And in this business, we use a lot of words, whether it's property listings, it's communication in terms of emails out to guests or to owners, it's blog posts, it's your About Us page. And if you know me at all, you know that I'm a huge advocate for a good About Us page. But the words you choose have the power to connect, or they have the power to fall flat. And in a world where AI is now writing everything from captions to full websites, it's never been more important to find your real human voice. And my guest today is someone who knows that better than anyone. Neely Khan is a gifted writer and a content strategist, and she's worked with some of the biggest names in the short-term rental world. I've known Neely for some time now, and I know that her work is honest, it's creative, and above all, it's human. Read some of her LinkedIn posts, and she shares so much about herself and her life through storytelling, and she is a master storyteller. And she's here with me today to share why authentic writing still matters. She's going to talk about how storytelling can build trust with your guests, and also what to do if you're not a writer, but you still want to connect meaningfully with your audience. Of course, we can't do any episode without talking about AI these days, so we'll dive into that biggest question that a lot of people are asking: how can we use it as a tool without letting it take over the soul of our content? And sadly, I'm seeing a lot of people doing this, take over the soul, and a lot of websites are now just looking, sounding, feeling just like everybody else. So Neely's going to talk about how you can stand out and be unique, even if you're not a classical writer as she is. So this is such an important conversation. I know you're going to walk away with a ton of inspiration and some really practical tips as well. So let's get on with it. Well, I'm super happy to have Neely Khan with me today. Neely and we've been talking for a long time on the socials, and then we met for the first time, I think, in Miami at a direct book summit. Is that right, Neely? Is that where we first met?
Yeah, we met at the Book Direct show, right?
You're absolutely right.
Years ago, I think.
Did we meet in Barcelona first before that?
We met in Miami first. And then in
Right.
Barcelona, we met again, and you very kindly gave me a Yorkshire tea bag, which I still tell people about because I really wanted a cup of tea and I couldn't find any good tea anywhere. So,
Well, do you know, that seems to be a theme of these podcasts, because I had Alexis Miller on the show a while back from Cottage Connections of Maine. And I went to the VR Nation conference in Austin back in April, and she arrived with a bag of Yorkshire tea bags for me. So it's all getting paid forward.
Oh, definitely my kind of people. Absolutely. Love that so much. Yeah. Can't believe that was a good few years ago. Yeah.
I know. Gosh, yeah, I don't like to look at how time is moving on here. Okay, so we have Neely Khan with us from Artwork Creative, or AWC, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. You're a writer, you're a creative. I love what you write on LinkedIn, because that's probably most of what I see of your writing. But you definitely do share your talents and your skills on there. But let's start with your journey. How did this all kick off? Because there aren't many people about now who just concentrate on being great writers, unless you're in journalism or that sort of publishing world.
Yeah, that's a very, very true point, actually. I was actually thinking that this morning. First of all, thank you so much. And likewise, I am so happy to be joining you on your podcast again. You know, I have so much respect for all of the work that you do and just all of the insights you share for our industry. So thank you so much for the kind words. In terms of my story and how I started doing what I'm doing now, so I was definitely one of those annoying kids in school where I always knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. I've always wanted to write full time. I think before the fascination of writing was the fascination of stories and storytelling. I have always, ever since I was little, been really enthralled by how stories help us remember things, how stories help us put meaning and almost logic even to random facts and things that happen to us. They help us understand things. So when I started writing full time as a profession after I graduated and things like that, this was around 10 years ago. And it was very much a decision that I made out of passion, that I made out of purpose. I'd just become a single mum and I didn't want to be a victim of my circumstances. And I found very early on, even going back 10, 11 years ago, that stories was the universal language that everybody connected to. And yet, 10, 11 years ago, this is something that brands weren't tapping into as much as they should have been, or in the way that I thought that they should have been. So when I then niched into the hospitality and more specifically the short-term rental, the vacation rental industry, I very much came in with this idea of, okay, storytelling isn't just about talking about who you are and sticking it on your about page. That's a tiny part of storytelling. Storytelling is very much your way of being, the way you show up as a brand, the way you communicate with your guests, the way you come across all of your touch points. And, those can be fiction stories, they can be non-fiction stories. There are so many endless opportunities. And I've been very lucky in the sense that in my early stages, when I joined this industry, I was presented with really great opportunities that I tried my best to leverage, and it kind of just grew from there. Yeah.
And here you are today. So what are you doing today?
So right now, after freelancing as a writer for a good years within this industry, I have now stepped in to run an agency called AWC, and we have repositioned it as a story branding agency specifically for hospitality brands. And what we do is we wrap emotionally charged, soulful stories around brands. And not only that, but we teach brands and their marketing teams how to use story branding, how to use storytelling to increase conversion, engagement, booking, sales. And obviously copywriting and writing is a large part of that.
I think you made a great point where you said, it's not just about the About Us page, because everybody thinks, well, that's where I tell my story. I tell my story about me. And there are people out there who have done this amazingly well. But there are others that are using stories. And while you were talking, I was thinking about a few of these, because you said that stories help you remember things. And I think back to some of the storytellers in this industry that I've listened to over the years. And in fact, I did a post this morning on LinkedIn and mentioned John DeJulius, who wrote a book called The Customer Service Revolution. And he did a presentation, he did a keynote, and I could not believe it was a 2014 Verma conference. I would have said it was 5 years ago, not 11 years ago. But that's how quickly time is passing. But he told stories in that presentation that I have never forgotten. And I mentioned one in my post this morning. And then there's others. David Angotti is from Guesty is out there talking about, and he talks a lot about his journey and the fact that he does long distance running. I mean, long distance, 100 miles at a time, which is crazy. But I always remember David at doing keynotes at some of our summits in 2016 and 2017. I remember the stories, the analogies. And then Casago, that we've worked with just recently, have a very powerful story at the heart of their business called The Steward's Tale. He talks about the Stigward's Tale, which is the medieval way of pronouncing it. And, you know, it's that steward of the medieval home that looked after it while the owner was away and fixed it when there was a storm and welcomed guests. And it's those stories. And forgive me, I'm rambling on.
Oh, no.
And when I'm meant to be interviewing you. But you just, this is the thing, Neely, when you start talking, you fire people up, I think, with ideas and creativity, and you make people think about the stories that they've heard, and perhaps they can tell. So I was going to ask you, what role do you think good writing plays in helping a property manager stand out? But I think we've said it all. But you come in on that one, because most vacation rental websites are bland, they're boring, they don't have any form of story in there. So what becomes the core what should become the core in a good website where a property manager or owner is telling that story?
Yeah, I think the question about writing is actually still very apt, because, as you've said, the story is the spine, and often the words we use are the tools to bring those stories to life. And I think the reason why I think that question is so relevant is because what I'm finding at the moment is that the majority of people in this AI-driven age, while they are embracing new tools, they're also thinking, but writing it's quite old-fashioned, it's for Luddites, etc., etc. And one thing that we must remember is that everything starts with writing. Everything starts with writing, and I think this is one of the reasons why, when I see the decline of copywriters in our industry, I think the biggest reason for that is because there has been this lack of being able to pivot and evolve. So, for example, when I talk about writing and copywriting now, I do so from a perspective of, we'll write your script, we'll write your podcast script, the outline of your videos, the kind of story that you want to tell on your website. It might not be full of words, but everything starts with something needs to be written in order for it to then come to life. So going back to your question about how do you then actually do that on a website, for example, I think, and I've always said this, I think I've said this on one of our previous podcasts too, I think the way you show up, whether it's in words, whether it's in images, whether it's in videos, that is all a consequence of all of the stuff that happens beforehand. It's a consequence of how you feel about your brand, the end message that you want to convey, your values, how you actually want your guests and your customers to feel. That should really be the first question that you're asking yourself before you even think about putting any kind of content together. And I think if you do that first, that will then naturally translate onto your website. And the other thing is that a lot of people, when they think about storytelling on websites, for example, they think of, the headline needs to be written in a certain way. The about page, again, needs to be written in a certain way, but actually it's about everything. It's about the colors you use. It's about the CTA buttons, where they're placed. It's about the message that people receive after they've popped in their details into an inquiry form on your website? Are you asking people for their preferred pronouns? Are you asking people by which name they're preferred to be addressed as? Because that's a story of you caring, of you paying attention to detail. So story is very much alive in everything that we do. Yeah, it goes quite far beyond, I think, what a lot of people maybe think or assume.
Well, you've taken it to a level I hadn't thought about, which is the inquiry form, the contact form, and imbuing that with the same story brand as you have everywhere else. So I guess it's every single step within, however, and you said the way you show up, which is, I think, something that is getting forgotten with this flood of AI-generated content. People aren't looking at that and saying, is this the way I want to show up? And that is spawning all the comments about M-dashes and emojis and, was that AI? It seems to have slowed down a little bit now. I think people are a little less excited about it all. But with so much of this AI-generated content flooding the internet, and I do see it and I recognise it in so many different places because it's lacking story, it's lacking humanity. I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but what do you see as the biggest risks of relying too much on it?
Oh, the biggest risks, I think we would definitely agree on this, is just the sameness and the homogeneity that comes out of it. Everybody sounds the same. And I think that for me is the most frustrating part. So I have absolutely no issues with people using AI tools to assist them with copy. And I say this as a writer, I perfectly understand that not everybody feels that they have the experience or the knack to write everything from scratch, including myself. So I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is that when there's no editing involved, there's no real detailed prompting involved, where people are using AI tools like taskmasters rather than storytellers and linguists. And it's kind of scary because I'm reading people's posts at the moment and their content, and I'm kind of looking for their personality in between their sentences. Somebody sent me a message from a very well-known organization a couple of weeks ago, and the message was very obviously AI generated, which again isn't the end of the world, but that message was an invitation, to ask me to join the network. And I could see that there was very little research that had been done about me, my agency, or anything that I do, and it felt so impersonal. And you know how I felt at the end of that? I felt like just not very cared for and not very important. And I think that message could have come from anyone, that's how it felt to me. And to me, it feels like, well, I don't know anything about this person because everything has gone through this AI filter. And I really miss seeing the personality in people's posts. I feel like we're really missing that at the moment. I miss the typos. I miss the clumsy sentences. I miss people over apologizing for, the things they write in overly nuanced ways because they say they're not professional writers, because that gives me an idea of the person behind the copy. And that I think is a great shame that we're starting to lose that a little bit, I think.
That segues me on to something I wanted to ask, because, I did the introduction to this episode and just talked about coming from a family of writers. Goes back to my great-grandfather, who was editor of a northern newspaper, and uncles and aunts that were all journalists, and my mother was a really talented writer. So I've grown up in this family of writers. But what about those people who don't, who just will say, I'm not a writer, I don't know how to do this stuff, I can't write a listing to save my life? What advice do you have for somebody who's feeling like that, but they still want to have this deep connection with their audience?
That's a great question, and fantastic that you come from a family of writers. I don't think I knew that about you. It's a conversation we can have later on for sure. I get this a lot, actually. I think the majority of our clients, the conversation always begins with, well, we're not as good as you, and we're not natural writers. And I think there's this massive, enormous misconception that writers are people who have this secret treasure trove of long words, and we know all the words to exist in the dictionary. And actually, I think in order to become a better writer, when you think about writing, it sounds quite cliched, but writing really is thinking. A person's writing is a sign of their intellect, emotional, academic, mental intellect, their experiences, and their mindset. I could read something from someone, and because of my experience, I could probably get an idea of where they are in their headspace right now. And I think in order to improve your skills as a writer, a lot of people fall into this sort of practice of, let me go and read a how-to guide, let me go and listen to another free YouTube course, or let me start writing and writing and writing. But actually, in order to write well, you need to teach yourself how to read and consume the correct kind of content first. I know this is very common advice, but ever since I was a little girl, it's the best advice I've ever had. Even when I was, in Cambridge and I was studying there, the advice was always just consume, read more than you write. Now, the problem we have in our industry and just the business world in general at the moment is that people are consuming content mostly from just one genre or one type of content. So they're all either reading business books or, whatever they find on their LinkedIn feeds, which, let's face it, is not the most wholesome stuff right now. Open your mind to different kinds of literature, Fiction is great. Novels are great if you have if you feel you have the attention span for it. Newspapers, broadsheet newspapers are fantastic. The scripts of films, these are all the things that are going to make you better writers, better storytellers. And I think get really clear on the message that you actually want to get across in your writing. I think clumsy writing is often the result of clumsy thinking. I don't really believe in writer's block, but I do believe in lack of inspiration and a lack of clarity. I think that's where often the problem comes from. But the first bit of advice I would give to anyone is to go out and read more books. Read, at least 52 books in 1 year, and then come back to me, and then we'll have another conversation about it.
You said something that just triggered me there for a moment, or triggered me into a different direction, about writing versus storytelling. Are they different?
I think so. I think in practice, yes. I think writing is, like I said, a tool. So it's one of the ways you could tell a story. Storytelling can happen through body language alone, right? You could not use any words and you could tell a story just simply by gesturing. The two of us could look at each other right now and not speak at all. And, with the right kind of gestures and body language, we could be telling each other a story. And storytelling is beautiful because storytelling is always open to interpretation, as is writing, but storytelling always leaves more room, for imagination. I would say storytelling always has some kind of a purpose, whereas as does writing. But I think when I think of storytelling, I think of transporting people somewhere, making them sort of believe something that you want them to, getting them on the same page as you. So I would say writing is important to storytelling, but they're not necessarily the same things.
Tell us about the book that you wrote.
Yeah, In Delhi at Pause is that the
in
one?
Delhi.
Yeah?
That's the one. Yes.
Oh, that was an amazing project. I wrote that, I think, 4 years ago now, and I believe it published around 3 years ago, and the marketing that I did for it was quite honestly quite atrocious. I wrote that for the personal marketing I did. I didn't push it to become a bestseller or anything like that, but it was written for a client of mine. They own a independent South Indian themed restaurant brand in the UK, and since launching the book, they've had great success. They've opened a few new sites, and when they initially came to me, they said that we would like a recipe book. I was like, okay, that's quite straightforward. I can write some recipes for you. But then what we did after that is that we decided, hang on, how can we make this even more wholesome and a real meaningful representation of your brand? So what we did was, rather than launching just another recipe book, we used stories, and we launched the first fiction story-led recipe book. And it really is the only one. I haven't found anything else like it within that sector. And what we did was, with every food item, with every meal that had a recipe, we first introduced it with a fiction story. So these stories, they were entirely made up. They were inspired by the everyday locals of North India, of Delhi. And the stories were incredibly, they were just really real. There's a story about a single mom who, sews clothes for a living, and it's told from the point of view of her 5-year-old daughter. There's a story about an illiterate dabbawala, who are the delivery people in Delhi, and how, even though he can't read or write English, is actually one of the most intelligent people because he helps the economy so much in Delhi. And the stories were actually about the characters rather than the food items, but we weaved the meals into those stories. And the response of the book was so beautiful. We found a lot of people were talking about the stories, the characters, and as a result of that, they were, of course, talking about the brand. And this is such a beautiful way of using storytelling. It's what we do with all of our clients in different ways, but we always lead with story. And the product mention or the brand mention comes as a result of that.
So tell us the name of the book again.
In Delhi, It Pours.
As in rain.
Yes, in Delhi it pours. And the entire semantic field of the book is rain, and how rain is a metaphor for blessings in India. And actually, it's a great writing tip too. I think when you're writing any piece of content, always have a semantic field in mind. And by that, I mean a theme, and then write to that theme.
Okay, so let's sort of take that into some of the clients you're working with, and you just said this is how I start with a client. Can you lay that out a bit more? What are the first things you do when you start working with a new client?
So the beginning is always my favorite part. We do very deep story work with our clients. Often they will come to us with a bunch of different values, services, all these things they want us to mention in their story. And we always start with I suppose in essence, it's a discovery session. I think we listen we listen probably far more than what we actually write. I think our services as a whole is more as listening, understanding, and then the writing is just a small part of that. So the very first thing, we will have a very sort of deep and meaningful conversation about what the brand, what the founders of that brand actually want to convey to their guests. What is the message? And we go beyond that. Why are you doing what you're doing? Who are the kind of people that you want to attract? What is actually important to you? Okay, you say it's sustainability. Is it environmental sustainability? Is it human sustainability? Is it about the kind of coffee cups you use, how you dispose of them? We get into the specifics. So that first session, sometimes it's broken up into 2 sessions because clients often have so much to say, and that is like gold for us. That is usually the first part, and often and always, should I say, the most important part. And then what I do is, we'll always record these sessions. I'll go back and listen to them after a few days. And then we will that will be the skeleton of what we want to create. I think one thing that we're really good at is when I listen back to these discovery sessions, because there's so much rich detail in there, I'm very good at kind of picking out the common themes, because those common themes then become the story, the main story that we want to lead with.
So I'm thinking that this is perhaps, stepping back to AI, for somebody who's perhaps having to do this themselves, this may be a role for AI, is to be able to say, okay, here is my story. And if it's comprehensive enough to ask AI so what are the common themes? Because I'm living it, so it's very difficult when you're actually involved in your own story to pull out the themes that might impact you as a brand and a business.
Yeah. I think that's actually a very useful way to use AI tools. And it's like we said earlier, we're not anti-AI. I very much use AI tools in the way we work as well. So for example, if I've, collected all of this information off the back of a meeting, we have the transcript, I will run it through an AI tool. I will listen to it first and I will make my notes, but I will also run it through an AI tool. And I think AI tools like ChatGPT, for example, are very good at picking out the patterns, the language patterns off the back of that transcript, and then remembering it, which I think is one of the main reasons why I love to use AI tools, because it remembers things that I as a human being can so often forget. But the other thing that I would say is this is where the balance is really important too, because in order to extract that story from someone, you do often need to start with a human being. Yes, the likes of ChatGPT can give you guided questions, and that is a great starting point. But I think it really helps to have a human angle on that too. So the reason why, for example, we recently started working with Abode Luxury Rentals. And when I went into the first meeting, the first discovery session with Rachel and Rob, the founders, who are beautiful people, I very much went in with just myself as Neely, very much a human angle. And there were very specific nuanced questions that I asked in order to extract that story from them. Not only that, but as they responded, as we're finding in this podcast, for example, my questions, I then had to obviously edit and tweak based on their responses and based on their energy. So I think for the beginning part, having that human touch is really, really important. But absolutely, when it comes to the transcripts and analyzing that content and finding the common themes, then AI tools are a fantastic way of saving time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you sort of bring it back to the podcast, because I send all my guests a list of questions. And I go to AI and say, give me, 10 questions that I should ask. And I'll edit them a little bit and send them off. And I always say, I've sent you the list of questions. These are guidelines, and I will rarely keep to them, because it is the responses that I get from the people I'm interviewing that then direct me into the next question. And I think this is probably why this podcast has always been so successful, because it's not just a list of, I'm not saying, okay, here's the next question. But I love what you're saying there, is that AI can't do this for you. Although I guess it can to a certain extent. I went out on a walk about 2 months ago, and I was starting to really use ChatGPT's advanced voice mode.
Yeah.
So I could go out for a walk, and I'd heard this from somebody who said, tell your life history to ChatGPT.
Yes.
And it will ask you a whole bunch of questions. And then you can use that, you can develop your brand voice out of that, because you're just chatting as if you were to a friend. And I did find that, it wasn't asking me, a set of questions. I would say something and it would come back, sycophantic as ever.
Oh, yes.
Oh, Heather, that's the most amazing thing. I now ask it not to be sycophantic. Please don't. You don't have to please me. But it was coming back saying, well, that was a really interesting thing that happened in your life. I ran away from boarding school. And when I was 13 years old, and it was a huge thing for me. I ran away in the middle of the night. I made my way to a railway station 5 miles from my boarding school by jumping into ditches to avoid cars, and finally ended up sleeping on the railway station, and then catching the train in the morning and getting home. And I told this story, and I have to say it came back and reflected a lot of how I was at that time and how that experience had then impacted my future. So that was a really good exercise, and I did use that. I came back, had the entire transcript, and then said, draw out some of my personality traits from all this that I've talked about. And it was remarkably accurate when I compare it to some of the psychometric testing I've done over the years. It's quite interesting.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. So that's an interesting exercise. If you haven't got a Neely who's going to be much more nuanced and deep in the questioning. So I don't want you giving away what you're doing with your clients, but generally, what happens after that discovery? Do you go to blog posts and web content and promotional material or communications? Is there an order to it, or does it naturally flow?
I would say it naturally flows. It's very much a fluid process. And by the way, I'm just going to go back to how you've mentioned how you speak to your your GPT, because I do exactly the same thing. And I just want to say, yes, people should absolutely go and try to do that. because your output from AI is only ever going to be as good as your input. So that's really fantastic advice, actually. So in terms of how I work with clients, what we do after the discovery session. So it very much depends on specifically what the client is looking for. The majority of the time it is, we need a story. So when I say that, I mean they need one narrative arc which will act as the North Star for all of their marketing, for all of their branding, for their tone of voice. That one story is going to guide them. So after the discovery session, we will then go back and offer the client a few different narrative arcs, depending on which angles they prefer, which kind of themes are speaking to them more. And then they will come back to us and say, I'm feeling this one, let's go with this one. Or they'll say, I'm feeling the first and the second one. Is there a way we can maybe mush them both together? We recently worked with a fantastic brand that's launching just outside of Atlanta. It's a micro resort. It's inspired by the concept of Yukio, the Japanese floating world. And the founder, Brian Hatcher, said, look, this is what I want it to be about, but I need some kind of a story that is going to act as our sort of the skeleton for everything that we do moving forward. So after I listened to his story and the reason why he was launching Yukio, I sent him a few different story drafts, mostly short form, very much draft story form. And he told me which parts he liked, which parts resonated with him the most. Then off the back of his feedback, we created one main narrative story arc. So this would sit on his website. It would sit on his decks, anywhere where he has to introduce the brand. We often write different versions. So we'll write a long version for maybe the websites, for bios, for decks. We'll write a short version for Instagram and social media and things like that. We'll write an even more micro version that they can then continue to repurpose in different ways. After we've done that, we will create an activation guide. So this is something that we create. It's a document they can save, they can keep, but then I also personally deliver an activation workshop to the team. And that is where the magic happens, where I say, okay, you've got this fantastic story. We've created the tone of voice guidelines for you because we do that as well as part of this service. Mm-hmm. This is how you now use it. And we will give them very tangible examples and show them this is how you use the story across all of your marketing, any future campaigns that you have. Obviously, they can come back to us when they want to launch something new. This is how you make sure that story doesn't break. And that is, I find, the most helpful part for our clients, because it's one thing giving them that story, it's another thing. And it's very much worked as a framework. It's our most popular service. The framework itself is called Kahani, which is the Hindi word for story. And it works for every brand we work with. And, it's fantastic because when people come into the first meeting with us, they are often a little nervous, or they don't know what to expect, or they feel like they need to give very sort of clinical, corporate-y answers. And by the end of the first meeting, you can just see the shoulders have dropped. They feel relaxed. They feel inspired. They're like, oh, we can do this and this. And I think that's the most fulfilling part of what we do.
I'm hoping you can share some websites that perhaps we can show on the show notes.
Of course.
So that people can see because it's as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, I want to see this. I want to see how it works in action. So I'll have you share a couple of examples for me to put in the show notes, if that's okay.
I definitely will. I think one of the most recent examples that I'm most proud of on a personal level is Tara Home Consulting, Christiana and her team. So they have a fantastic consultancy business. They consult with other short-term rental brands, and they help and coach brands through any sort of phase of the business that they're in. So right through from startup to exit and anything in between. And when I heard about all of the wonderful things that we're doing, we came up with one line, with one story: you can do anything. And the story that comes off the back of that, now we have, so their team members now are sharing these micro videos about their own you can do anything moments and their own you can do anything stories. They invite their target clients and their target audience to do the same. So there's that beautiful rapport. And it's just opening a door to so many more meaningful partnerships. And Christiana sent me a message a couple of weeks ago to say, because of this You Can Do Anything story that we've now launched, I'm learning so much more about my own team. And, that's beautiful, isn't it? That will translate. It's very much a long game. It is a long game. I'm not saying that when you work with us with the Kahani framework, for example, you're going to see results straight away. You might not. You might. I don't know. But it really works in the long game, and it gives you that consistency, and that builds trust.
Yeah.
It's great.
So let's go a little bit more practical here.
Okay.
I've really got a really good appreciation of what you do and how it works with companies, but practically not everybody's going to be able to work with somebody who can come in and do this for them. Could you give some tips and some recommendations on how property managers should, say, go look at their brand, at their websites, perhaps, at the communication styles they're using? How do they pull out their own stories and begin to imbue that into everything they do?
Yes, this is another great question, because there are so many different ways that you can use stories. But I do appreciate that often, because there are so many different ways, it's difficult to know where to start. So let's start with something really simple, like your email sequences, right? Really simple, something that most people can start. Most people probably already have their emails set up. They have an email database. Rather than sending something like newsletters to your guests, to your target audience, why not just think of a theme or, an idea that will actually inspire your guests? Why not write letters in the tone of voice of an innkeeper or whatever else is, suitable for your brand? And a lot of people might turn around and say, well, that's a bit soft, this and that. But actually, if that's appropriate for your target audience, obviously you need to have a think about who your audience is, what works for your brand. That is such a fantastic way to, one, get people to actually read the email, to tell other people about it, because I can't remember. I'm subscribed to a lot of emails, and I can't remember the last time a vacation rental company wrote to me in a way that felt personal, that felt like a letter, that felt like a story, that had some nice artwork, that had a really nice, meaningful message. Most of the emails I receive are, oh, we've just refurbished X property, or this is our Christmas, offer. Offers are great, don't get me wrong, but dress them up in something that people will actually get excited about, and speak to the child in them. I believe everybody likes that, speak to the nostalgia in them. So that's one very basic way that I think most people, even with little writing and storytelling experience, even without a marketing team, that's something you can quite quickly incorporate into your marketing strategy. And I do believe that, when you start doing that, and if you do it for long enough, if you're consistent with it, because without consistency, there's no point in doing anything, you will start to see, people will reply to your emails. I've seen this with every single client I've worked with. People have replied and said, you know what, that's a great email. And by the way, what are you doing for XYZ? 100% of the time that's worked. Another way that you can, and this is a super magical way, which will not only, I believe I've seen increased conversions, but it allows brands to increase their prices, because stories, they increase the value of things tenfold. The perceived value of things, once you attach a story to it, it's the reason why Andrex toilet paper is among the most expensive in the UK, and the other toilet paper brands are a lot cheaper, but Andrex still dominates the market. It's because of the puppy on the pack. It's because of the story about the puppy. Yeah, the toilet paper is more or less the same. So what I would suggest is, say you have, I guess this would work better for a company with, a smaller number of properties. If you've got that boutique vibe about you, it's a really lovely idea. Each of your properties, right? And we've done this recently for a company called Just For You Holiday Homes in the Isle of Wight. Take each of the properties and write a fictional founding myth about them. So I did this first for a restaurant company called Dishoom. And then I thought, wait, this is great. It can be applied to literally any business, but especially short-term rental operators. Write a fictional founding story. So as an example, for Just For You Holiday Homes, One of their properties is based in the village of Ryde, which is known as a small fishing village in the Isle of Wight. And its fictional founding story, it's fictional, but it's still very much inspired by its geographical location and the history of Ryde. We wrote a fictional story about a fisherman who lived there many, many years ago. He fell in love with a rich merchant's daughter, but her father, who was very wealthy, didn't approve of their relationship. So he then resorted to writing handwritten love letters to her and hiding them underneath the floorboards of that property. So we wrote that as a founding story. And now what we're doing is we're working with the brand on helping them bring those stories to life. So recreating those love letters and leaving them in the property itself as little Easter eggs of the story. Because now you've gone from offering a short-term rental stay to a themed experience. And you can 100% increase your prices, your rates as a result of that. And I bet you, because I haven't really seen very many short-term rental brands doing this at all, you will probably become one of the only doing that, leading with story in your area. Excellent PR opportunity, excellent way to differentiate yourself. Story gives you a point of difference. And it's so much fun too, right? I mean, if I had the choice between staying at a cottage, but staying at another cottage where there's this beautiful love story attached to it, even though I know it's fictional, I'll want to stay at the latter because I would appreciate the theming and the experience. It's all about world building. Think about the world you're creating in your brand, and then everything.
Well, this is it. It's about looking at the people who are going to be your guests.
Yeah.
And understanding where they're coming from and the fact that they want to be treated like people and not as numbers or heads in beds.
Exactly. And I know you've written about this. You write about this a lot, actually, on LinkedIn, that the biggest thing missing from hospitality is often hospitality itself. And I think in this age of scale and grow and yada, 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 sometimes we do miss that personal touch and that, the people who are checking into your properties, they are actually people. Yeah.
So as we come to the end here, Neely, I just want one big tip for anybody who's feeling overwhelmed by this conversation, perhaps because you've packed so much into it, but they're feeling overwhelmed by the burden of content creation, particularly if they're looking at one of these bland websites that just says, "Here's my place, come rent it." Mm-hmm. And they want people to come rent it. They're going to have to do more for it. What is one small thing they could start doing today to get some motivation and to get them moving?
Yeah. Oh, that's a hard question. One small thing. Okay, so I would start off with, there is a word in narratology called diegesis, and it's a Greek word for narrative, and it refers to the tone that your story is setting. I think hospitality business owners, short-term rental business owners, they would fare very well from just taking a step back from all of their branding and their marketing and really having a think about the theme of what they're trying to create, the world. What is the world you're trying to create? Forget about, take your STR marketing hats off, put your world building hats on. What is the world and what are the emotions you want to create? Then write a list of all of the things that are related to that theme. So, for example, what kind of language do you imagine? Think of your brand as a person. If your brand walked into a coffee shop, what kind of words would that person use? How would they dress? What would be important to them? Write all of that down. And that will give you a really nice, it's a small thing to do, but it's a nice starting point. A lot of this is really just about your mindset and how you approach things and how you approach your branding and your marketing. But definitely start with feeling and just go out and expose yourself to different kinds of content. Watch a film, watch a play, read a different book. I get my best ideas about marketing and branding from brands that have nothing to do with our industry. And that is really where the best inspiration lives. So just look beyond what you're being taught at conferences and events and just go out there, because there is inspiration outside of our industry as well, believe it or not.
Well, that brings me back to Matt Landau, who talks about a conference, I think, that he and Antonio Bortolotti went together to in Morocco. And it was a business conference, but he said it was a conference like nothing he'd ever been to. And he came back with so many ideas. And he said, and he's always said, you've got to think outside this box that we've put ourselves in. Yeah, go to something different. Yeah. Go to a retreat, or go to something where people who are not in short-term rentals hang out 100%. And get talking to them. You'll get that inspiration. I get it from going to my pickleball.
There you go.
From going to play pickleball. There is a lady there who I'm connecting with, because I'm going to hopefully do some AI work with her and her company. And she runs she's Indigenous Canadian, and she runs a non-profit in our local town that I'd never heard of. But she celebrates Indigenous art, and so every time there's an event in the area, they have all the creatives are out there, and it's just amazing. And I've taken a lot from that, just meeting somebody outside my small world, but bringing what I'm learning from them back into it.
Yeah, we should get them to speak at these conferences and events. I think it would be a breath of fresh air, honestly. It really would be,
Yeah, absolutely. Neely, it's been absolutely fantastic. And I know, I have this long list of questions. I think I started with number 1 and that was it. We went on to all sorts of other things. Well, no, it's you talk like you write. You have this wonderful flow in your narrative, and it's a blessing for me in what I do. So thank you so much for doing that, for joining me and sharing with everybody.
I really appreciate it. Always a pleasure, Heather. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me today for that conversation, Neely Khan. I hope you all found her insights on writing and storytelling and authenticity just as valuable as I did, because it's a powerful reminder that while AI has its place, it's your voice, it's your story. That's what truly sets you apart in this business. It's your humanness that makes it what it is. And if content creation has ever felt overwhelming, I hope that today's episode offered a lot of encouragement that you don't have to do it all perfectly. You just have to do it with your heart and your soul. So before we wrap up, I want to tell you about something really exciting we've just launched. It's called Straight Chat, and it's our brand new online community which we've created specifically for short-term rental professionals who want to learn more about AI. Straight, as in Straight Chat, stands for STR AI technology. So if you're looking to learn more about it, looking for trusted information, some great conversations, and some direct access to me and the team, you're going to love this. For just $9 a month, yes, that's right, we're just charging $9 for our first 100 founding members. You're going to get exclusive access to the community, to our weekly live discussions, to our library of super prompts, which are simply amazing, and a supportive network of hosts and managers who get what you're going through while you're thinking about or actually adopting AI. You can check it out. You can join us over at vacationrentalformula.com/AI or go to the link on the show notes. And of course, that's where you'll also find all the things we mentioned today. There was a lot of different websites and platforms we mentioned today. So do go and check out the show notes at vacationrentalformula.com. Thanks again for tuning in. If you're enjoying the podcast, as always, please leave us a review wherever you listen to your shows. It really helps more people discover the show. So until next time, take care, stay inspired, and keep telling those stories that only you can tell. It's been a pleasure as ever being with you. If there's anything you'd like to comment on, then join the conversation on the show notes for the episode at vacationrentalformula.com. We'd love to hear from you, and I look forward to being with you again next week.